A major weapons deal between Israel and India is back on the table as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wraps up his 6-day visit to the country. Israel and India have been ramping up economic ties since India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi took office in 2014. Will we see more trade deals between Israel and India, and how will relations between the two nations develop in the year ahead? Joining me in Beijing is Mr. Saibal Dasgupta, China correspondent for the Times of India, and in Tel Aviv, Mr. Meir Javandanfa, a Middle East analyst. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. So on Wednesday, Netanyahu said a major weapons deal between India and Israel, Israeli defense contractor, was back on the table after the Indian government originally dropped the $500 million deal. Why did India cancel the weapons deal in the first place, Saibal?
You see, in the first place, what India did is went through a review of a lot of deals, a lot of arms deals that had taken place, and the new government wanted to review them, not only from the standpoint of how the deals were done, but also about the new technologies. Do those technologies still suit? Does the supplier have the ability to upgrade those technologies? These are the issues that led to the cancellation of the deal in the first place. But now the deal has been revived, and a $1 billion deal for anti-tank equipment or guns have been placed.
So, Mr. Javandanfa, what's the significance of this weapons deal for Israel?
I think the most significant part is that Israel is finding a new important customer for its weapons industry. Weapons make up an important part of Israel's export to India, but I mean in total, in terms of share of the Israeli market in India's foreign purchases, we only make up 7%. India buys far more weapons from Russia, for example. But for Israel, still, it's an important market, and Israel wants to use the defense sector as well as the agriculture sector and cybersecurity as a linchpin for future improvement in terms of relations with India.
So, Saibal, do you think this weapons deal cancellation now back on track, has that hurt ties at all between the two countries?
No, because Mr. Netanyahu said that the ties have not been affected, not only because of this, but also India voted against the Jerusalem decision of Trump. So the ties have not been affected, that's what he has said, and now it is back on the table. An important point that must be noted is that India is the biggest customer of Israel for weapons, although Israel accounts for a certain smaller percentage of total Indian purchases, because India is becoming a major purchaser of arms across the world. So that is a very important step forward, and the two countries have come closer, and the dimensions go far beyond Israel, far beyond the two relationships. You see, what is happening in India is that Israel has certain capabilities other than arms. It has one of the best intelligence agencies in the world, which is what India needs, because fighting terrorists, particularly those based in Pakistan, has been a major source of concern in India, particularly after the Bombay attack and the Uri attack. So what is happening is that India needs those capabilities to do those kind of investigations which Mossad or the Israeli agency is very capable of. That's one area. Second, everyone knows that in agriculture, particularly in rice and other areas, Israeli scientists have done wonderful work, and India would like to collaborate, because being a developing country, it's very important for India.
Mr. Javandanfa, I want to talk to you about business, because Netanyahu's delegation includes 130 Israeli business people, coming from cybersecurity, military, water, energy, and agriculture. And we saw that 9 MOUs were signed on Monday. But, if you look at the trade relationship, you can see that it's heavily in favor of Israel. So there's a lot more exports going to India. Do you see that reversing anytime soon?
No, but I think what's important here is to develop the bilateral ties, because we have a lot of room to develop. In terms of bilateral ties, last year the total was something like $5 billion, and that's half of our trade with China. We do twice as much business with China. So Israel sees a lot more room to develop the bilateral trade. India has a lot of competitive advantages in some areas, some industries. We have competitive advantage in other industries. But what is very important for Israel is to diversify its dependence away from the European Union, which has been our biggest trade partner now. There was concern that the Europeans may impose boycotts against Israel. So there has been this important shift away, and this has been very important and successful in terms of our developing our trade with important countries such as China and now India. It also boosts the image of Prime Minister of Israel to say that, that to show, and he is showing it, that Israel is developing relations with the regional giants and regional superpowers such as China and India, and this is helping Israel's profile in the international community. And last but not least, you got to remember that two of the most important, if we could say, ethnic lobbies in the United States are the pro-Israel lobby and also the pro-India lobby in America, and they have played an important part in cementing the relationship between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Netanyahu. So all in all, this is very important, and of course there could be bumps on the way, but Israel is prepared to pay a price in terms of maintaining its relationship with India.
And Mr. Dasgupta, what do you think of that trade imbalance between the two countries and also the complementarities between the two economies?
One major area that Israel and India are likely to collaborate is technological partnership. Because India has its strong technologies in not only IT, even in satellite and other areas. India recently launched 31 satellites in one day for 7 different countries across the world. So it's possible that India is looking for markets for its satellites, for its IT businesses. So it's important for India to expand to larger areas. As far as the Muslim world is concerned, India is one of the biggest buyers of petroleum from the OPEC countries. But India's political influence or diplomatic influence has not helped India when it comes to dealing with terrorist attacks from Pakistan. And they have not been. So it is time for India to expand its vision and look for partners across the world.
Mr. Javan-Dafa, we saw that Prime Minister Netanyahu describing bilateral ties with India as a marriage made in heaven. Now, incidentally, he said the same thing on relations with China when he met with Chinese President Xi Jinping last year. So how do you interpret this foreign policy wording? Is there room for so many marriages made in heaven? It's polygamy.
Well, I once read on the wall of a barbershop in London, polygamy is having one too many wives, so is monogamy. But joking aside, this is Prime Minister Netanyahu trying to impress his hosts. Both countries are, of course, very important for the state of Israel. We cannot ignore our friendship with China and with India for different reasons. And just as it's important, for example, for China and India to have a relationship with countries that Israel perhaps who are rivals of Israel in the region, it's of course for Israel it's important to have as many, as in the case of India also, to have as many relationships with trade, because today, when we talk about security, it's more economic security is becoming more important than weapons, especially when we look at the recent economic crisis in the world. So this is Prime Minister Netanyahu trying to complement his Indian hosts, and I think relationship in the Indian subcontinent and in the Far East for Israel is very, very important. And this government or any other government will be investing a hell of a lot in terms of improving relations with India and with China and with other regions with other countries in the region as well.
Now let's talk about balancing alliances. Mr. Dasgupta, New Delhi has traditionally been pretty low-key when it comes to bilateral ties with Israel because of the Muslim community there and relations with Arab nations, because it depends on a lot of oil imports. So why is there such a bromance between Modi and Netanyahu? Mr. Dasgupta?
One of the things that I was mentioning...
Sorry,
is it for me?
Yes.
One of the things I was mentioning is that India has been extremely worried about terrorism. That's an important thing. We have to understand that more than 12% of Indian population are Muslims, so India has to be sensitive about the Palestine cause as well. In fact, Mr. Modi will visit Palestine without visiting Israel only next month, and also go to UAE. So the point is that India is no way compromising its stand on certain issues that it has held dear for many years. But it should not stop India from expanding its relationships across the world. In fact, Netanyahu also said in New Delhi that India did not vote on the Jerusalem issue as I would have liked, but it is not going to come in the way.
Yeah, Mr. Javan-Dafar, that was a bit of a shocking vote when India voted in favor of the UN resolution opposing the US decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, although Netanyahu said one UN vote could not change their relations. If the Israeli-Palestinian conflict heats up, is India going to have to take sides?
I don't think anybody is under the illusion, or anybody should be under the illusion, that the Palestinian issue is not going to find favor among Indians and among other countries in China and among the overwhelming majority of the countries in the world. You know, in politics, especially in diplomacy, perception is more important than reality. And right now the perception is that it is the Israeli government that doesn't want peace. So more than the government of President Mahmoud Abbas. I'm not talking about Hamas. They've never wanted peace. That's something else. So in the future, I think, despite the good relationship with China and with India, despite Prime Minister Netanyahu describing it as marriage made in heaven, you know, this issue will be very close to India's heart, because number one, it's Prime Minister Netanyahu that's expanding settlements, and number two, majority of the world sees him as the party that's not interested in peace, and number three, we don't expect anybody. I don't think it would have been realistic for Israel to expect anybody to support the Jerusalem decision. Had we formed friendship or maintained friendship with only countries that supported that move by Prime Minister Netanyahu, we would have been left with very few friends. So being realistic, I think it is accepted that many of our friends were against that decision, and we have to live with it and continue to develop our friendship.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Dasgupta?
You see, India has a very good relationship with Iran as well, and which is not something that Israel likes. It's not just the Palestine issue. But then Iran is a Shia nation, and it's not a Sunni nation, and most of India's Muslims are Sunnis. So those are the contradictions with which a government has to manage its relationship across the world. But when it comes to Modi, he is sort of more pragmatic and more realistic about the situation on the ground, and not sticking to a set of principles that have been laid down. So there is a lot more flexibility in the manner in which he goes about, and he has traveled across the world, built personal relationships. So he is more focused on the ground, which is also the reason why India-China relationship is more focused on realities of the situation rather than you know, sticking to old feelings and sentiments. Then we will go nowhere. So this is what is happening in the relationship with Israel.
Thank you so much for those insights, Mr. Saibal Dasgupta, China correspondent for the Times of India, and in Tel Aviv, Mr.